Hi everyone, and welcome to today's painting tutorial where I'll take you through how I painted this Primaris infiltrator of the Hospitallers Space Marine chapter. A really cool chapter, and I just wanted to do something different. So over a Corax white undercoat, I'm going to be sort of working backwards in a way, but I'm going to begin painting in the recesses, so all of the rubber parts of the Space Marine armor, just between the Space Marine armor. And essentially just around the entirety of the miniature as well. And I'm not going to be too worried. I mean, I'll try and be as neat as I can while doing this, but I'm not going to be too worried if the lines are a little bit too thick, because I will be moving on to cleaning up the armor as we move through the video. So with all of the recesses done, as you can see though, I have left the parts that are going to be metal. So now, with that in mind, I'm now going to be giving all of the parts that will eventually be a metallic color a base coat of Vallejo black. And just if necessary, try and get 2 thin coats done as well. So with the first steps now done, I'm just going to be using some Ulthuan Grey to start cleaning up all of the armor. And as you can see, it's come together really nicely already. So this is why when painting white, I like to just work backwards, as getting to this step is just that much easier in terms of cleaning up all of the armor. And now as just a final edge highlight for the armor, I'm just going to be using some Vallejo Dead White. Just to bring it all out a little bit more. So with the armor now done, I'm going to be moving on to what I was a little bit nervous about. This is a pretty tricky design to paint, but with the base coat of Mephiston Red, I'm going to be beginning painting one of the Hospitallers chapter symbols on their kneecap. And it is a checkers design, and I at this point didn't have a lot of experience doing this, but I did practice this on my paint palette before applying this and filming it. So I'd recommend you doing the same if you don't have much experience doing this. So just making sure to get as straight a line as possible, diagonally around the kneecap. So just follow the paint around as best you can. And now just for the second one. And I am using my Raphael 8404 size 1 for this, but any paintbrush just that holds a really good point will do just fine. As especially considering this is over white, it's a lot easier just to try your best to get it right straight away, as opposed to having to go back and correct it too much. Whereas of course, if it was over black, it would be a lot easier to correct. Or any darker color for that matter. And apologies, some of this may be out of focus. It was really difficult to get this in a position that was easy to film. But as you can see now, just picking out the squares. So just working my way across one by one. Just making sure that they're separated on each line. And now just with some Vallejo Dead White, I'm just going to begin cleaning up those lines. And this will also work as a nice sort of subtle highlight just underneath as well. And now just picking out the white squares, and again just being as careful as I can. And I'm just going to try and reshape these so that they are as even as possible to the red squares. And I'd say at this point that this is probably the most difficult part, just because it is really hard to get those edges even in the shape of a square. But as always, just really taking my time. And as you paint this, just make sure that you focus on the rest of the squares, just to make sure that they are all even as you progress. And as you can see, it's already looking really, really cool. And just to finish off this particular part of the chapter symbol, I'm just going to paint a small blade in the center, just using Vallejo black, but any black will do just fine. And as I often say as well, it's really great just to make sure that you have a reference when painting something like this for the first time. So whilst painting this, for example, I did have the chapter symbol just up on a Google image on my computer. Now, just to try and make the hilt as even as possible, I'm just cleaning it all up with some Vallejo dead white. And just the end of the blade as well. And since it is such a small detail, it's really quite difficult to get it as even as possible, but just do what you can, do your best. So with the first chapter symbol now completed, I want to move on to the shoulder pad chapter symbol, which is the same as the Black Templars one. So when painting this cross, I like to start at the top, just try and get a really nice shape on the first one, and then copy that as I do the parts of the cross either side, and then at the bottom as well. So as you can see, the first part of the cross that I did, it isn't in perfect shape at this point, but it is about the right size of where I want it to be. So I will come back later to that and correct it with some white, but for now I'm just going to begin working my way around. And with each part of the cross as well, just making sure when I get to the center that it's really, really quite thin. But overall, I'm really happy with the shape of it. So when I do correct it with white, it really won't take too much to get it all shaped the way I want it to. So I'd say at this point, the hardest parts of this particular color scheme are finished, but now I'm going to be moving on to all the metal parts. So just with some black metal by scale 75, just going to begin base coating all of those. Such as the helmet and the metal parts of the gun and the comms array as well. And now for the first highlight, I'm going to be using thrash metal, again by scale 75. And I decided to leave a lot of the black metal in the recesses just because when I was looking at the color scheme for the Hospitalers chapter, it did look as though all of the metal parts were quite dark, with some pretty sharp sort of highlights. And black metal is just an awesome color as well. And now just as a final highlight for the metal, I'm going to be using a final highlight of heavy metal by scale 75, just to start bringing out the armor that little bit more. So with all of the metal parts done now, I want to move on to the gun pouch for the bolt pistol. So originally I was going to paint this part grey, but I decided I wanted it to stand out a little bit more, so I did decide to go with brown. So with a base coat of Rhinox hide, I'm just going to apply that all around, and then going to be moving on to a highlight of Doomball brown. And as you can see with what I just did there, I thought that the initial application of the Rhinox hide was a little bit too thick. So I did actually go ahead and grab a tiny bit of water onto the brush, directly onto the brush, and then just applied it over the Rhinox hide, just to smoothen it out a little bit and then move the paint around. I just sometimes find it's a little bit easier to do that when working on a surface such as this. And I did want to blend this a little bit, so as you can see, I haven't really bothered to wash the paint off my brush of the Rhinox hide. and just carefully begin applying the Doomball brown just around, essentially mostly just as an edge highlight. And I will be adding some thin lines as well, just across the pouch. Because if you look carefully on the design, I mean, it's quite subtle, but if you look at the pouch's design, there are some minor creases in it. So I just like to highlight over those as best I can. Of course, it doesn't have to be absolutely precise over the exact creases in the pouch itself, in the molding of the model, but it does add a little bit more to it by just adding those subtle lines. So as you can see, just making sure my brush is on a nice downward angle, just to get as thin a lines as I can. And now just working some the other way as well. And when doing these as well on something like a pouch, I try my best not to connect the lines that I'm doing. So just try and make it as though they're streaks coming from either side. And now with the next highlight of Carrick Stone, I didn't actually just want to use straight up Carrick Stone. So I have decided just to mix a little bit of that with the Doomball brown. And of course, if you want to continuously go lighter and lighter, you can just add a little bit more Carrick Stone each time. But I was pretty happy with it at this point. So with the pouches now done and the belts around the model, I'm going to be painting the... Now, I'm not actually sure what this particular part of the model is called. I've actually just decided to go with comms array, which is what I think it is. But yeah, the part with the comms array and the screen. Leave a comment below if you know exactly what this part of the model is called. But I am just going to be using German grey for this, and then I have mixed in, as you can see on the palette, there's a few different greys there, but essentially all I've done is used some German grey as a base coat over the Vallejo black, and then I've mixed a little bit of white to make, I guess, what would equate to a sort of a Dawnstone level grey from Citadel. And then another mix I've done with even more white added to it in what is close to Administratum Grey by Citadel. But if you've watched any of my previous videos, you will know that German Grey has quickly become one of my favorite greys to use. It's just such a useful color. I highly recommend it. As I've definitely found multiple uses for it in the short time that I've been using it. And speaking of which, when it does come to selecting what paints you want to use, what tools you want to use, it is best just to trial things, and not only just read reviews, but even if you just grab one or two, perhaps even highly recommended, for example, Vallejo paints or Scale 75 paints, or even Citadel paints, of course. Up until I started experimenting a little bit with Scale 75 and Vallejo, Citadel is primarily what I used to use, and it actually still is. But with that being said, it is good to venture out and try new things, as it will definitely have a positive impact on improving trying new things. So as you can see, it's really come together now. And again, going back to Mephiston Red, I really wanted to tie in all of the red on this particular model as much as I could, but still keeping it relatively unique to each part of the miniature. So with that being said, I'm going to be using the Mephiston Red by Citadel just as a base coat for the lenses. And some Troll Slayer orange as well. But I have actually mixed a little bit of that Troll Slayer orange with the Mephiston Red. Although if you do have Wild Rider Red, that would also work as a really good highlight to the Mephiston Red. And for me personally, when it comes to painting lenses, I do prefer, as opposed to just using, let's say for example, Mephiston Red, Wild Rider Red, and then let's say Troll Slayer Orange or Fire Dragon Bright, I do like to just blend them a little bit and just gradually bring up that sort of subtle glow effect that you would see on lenses such as, well, Space Marine lenses. And just with each highlight, just working a little bit lower at the front of the lens. And when it comes to doing the little bit of reflective light, I don't like to water the white down too much and just do such a small dot that it just brings it all out that little bit more, as you can see there. Now I have included the Emperor's Finest gold arm that I've been doing in previous painting tutorials for my Ultramarines one, for example. But I have since changed it. Now I wanted the gold to be a little bit darker, so I've opted to begin the gold process with Viking Gold by Scale 75. And then work my way up with the previous ones. The previous one I did on the Ultramarines, which was actually a base coat of Dwarven Gold, and then Elven Gold, and then onto Storm Host Silver by Citadel. But as you can see there, it's just actually quite a nice, subtle, semi-dark sort of gold. So I just decided after playing around with the colors a little bit that this would work a little bit nicer for what I was going for. And for the Hospitaller's color scheme, as you can see, this gold that I'm showing you here also applied for the gold rim around the shoulder pad. But just for the purposes of the highlights, I just thought I'd go with the arm. And now just straight away moving on to Elven Gold. And again, you don't really have to worry about washing the paint off your brush for this part, as I really want these different shades of gold to blend in nicely to one another. And I'm really just picking out some subtle highlights with the Elven Gold. And now just to finish off the gold, I'm just going to be using some Stormhost Silver mostly just as an edge highlight. But I will be coming back to the Stormhost Silver later on when I get to just some of the battle damage around the gold. So with all of the gold now done, I'm going to be moving back to what is currently, I guess, my favorite little trio of shading colors right at the moment. So Rhinox Hide by Citadel, German Grey by Vallejo, and Vallejo Black as well. So up until, I would say, about 2 months ago, I was predominantly using contrast paints and Citadel shades to do the vast majority of my shading. And I did decide I wanted to try something a little bit different. So with that being said, I did start to practice with these 3 colors in particular, and it's been a lot of fun actually. And don't get me wrong, the Citadel shades and contrast paints are absolutely useful depending on what you're working on. But as always, it's always a good idea just to try new things, and as to whether or not they work, it's ultimately not, I guess, really the point, but it's more so just to get that little bit more experience and step outside of your comfort zone. Because, I mean, for me personally, this isn't even something I would have thought of doing sort of even 4 months ago, so it's just always a good feeling when you feel as though you are improving, even just a little bit, week by week, or, you know, day by day even. So as you can see so far, I have just been jumping between the colors. With the gold in particular, I did decide to work with Rhinox Hide, as it is a little bit more subtle than the darker German Grey and of course the Vallejo Black. But then once I could see that the application, it did look a little bit thin for the shading I was going for, I then jumped back and forth between the black and grey as well. So again, really cool, sort of fun way to practice shading. And just in a stifling motion, just really, really subtle, sort of aged sort of battle damage on the armor. But really, really subtle, because I didn't want to take too much away from the gold, as I was really, really happy with how the gold was looking. Now with my Space Marine project that I'm doing with the Emperor's Finest, they are on, if you have seen the base that I did for my Ultramarines, the landscape is pretty ravaged by warfare. So I did decide to go for pretty heavily damaged armor. But as you can see, even though the battle damage will be quite severe by the time I'm done with this, initially I just want to build it up in a subtle manner, as I don't want to put too much paint on and then be unhappy with how the application actually looks, as you know, especially with something as vibrant as white, or if it was yellow, for example, as well. So with this, I did just want to sort of start small and then work my way up. So as you can see, I've applied the battle damage relatively heavily around the miniature, more so around the feet as I mentioned earlier, just with the theme of the landscape for my Space Marines. And now just with some Stormhost Silver, just over all of the metallic parts, so any battle damage that I've done over any of the metal or the gold. I'm just going to begin highlighting just underneath the battle damage, as I'm sure you've seen in plenty of other painting tutorials for this particular part of how to highlight battle damage. And now just over the white, I'm just going to use some white, of course, underneath the battle damage over the armor. Now I'm going to be moving on to the base. So I did apply some Astro Granite debris just through the center, as you can see there. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to show that part. And then I just did a base coat of German grey over all of that as well, with a little bit of black mixed in. And now I'm just dry brushing with some Dawnstone Dry. Of course, if you just have the Dawnstone, that would work just fine. Although I do prefer to use the Dawnstone Dry for this. Now I decided I want to darken the rocks a little bit, so I've just gone back and using some Vallejo Black just to do that. So essentially just at the bottom of the rocks, closer to where the lava is going to be. So to give that sort of scorched earth effect. And now with some Mephiston Red, Troll Slayer Orange, and Uriel Yellow, I'm just going to begin painting on the lava. Now I'm not going to be overly tidy with this, but I did want to make sure I don't hit too much on the rocks and also not on the astrogranite debris, as for my theme I'm not really doing a heavy sort of lava or like an intense sort of lava. It's more of just a subtle, almost like essentially, so less like a lava effect and more so as though the earth has just been bombed so much that it's just completely torched. So just a heavily battle-worn sort of urban battlefield in a way. And once this step's dry, I'm just going to apply the Modern Earth, and then I did use a hairdryer just to help make the cracks a little bit larger and to speed up the drying process. I didn't actually include that in this video, but essentially just when using the hairdryer, just be a little bit careful and to keep it moving as well. So I was mostly pretty happy with it at this point, but I did just want to make the edges around the base a little bit more in theme with the scorched earth. So I have just added a little bit of dry brushing of Mephiston Red and just touching up the edges that I missed with the Modern Earth, just with a little bit of that Mephiston Red as well. And then of course I'll just be painting the rim of the base with Vallejo black as well. And I'm not sure if I've mentioned this from my previous videos, but I always do finish my miniatures with Munitorium varnish as well. Mostly just to help, just to protect the paint. I mean, if you are putting in all of this effort with your miniatures in terms of the painting side of things, then it's a really, really good idea to protect them. And just as a final touch, I'm going to apply some Abaddon Black just over the top of the cracks. So here it is, everyone. Here is my completed Infiltrator of the Hospitalers Space Marine chapter. So I had a ton of fun painting this. I actually highly recommend this, as if you're unsure as to what chapter to choose, this is the most fun I think I've had painting a Space Marine chapter so far. So I hope you found this tutorial useful today. If you did, leave a like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.